So I'm sitting down with Greg Thompson, who is a medieval coin dealer and has a wealth of knowledge about Celtic origins and the history of Ireland coins. This was something I couldn't show on my entire coin video, but I thought I'd like to share it with you here. It goes pretty in depth. So enjoy.
Today and often I get asked about the history of Celtic coinage. And there are a lot of people with Celtic heritage, but they don't really know a whole lot about the history. They think sort of Ireland and Scotland and that sort of thing, right? So a lot of times I have to get out Celtic coins from before the time of Christ so they understand that the Celts lived all across Europe, and it was their interaction with the Romans essentially being wiped out, like what would an analogy be, like the American Indians? The Celts were a tribal civilization. They did issue some of their own coins late as they adopted Greco-Roman ways. But why do we always think of Scotland and Ireland as Celtic when the great centers of Celtic civilization were in what is today Germany and France and Spain? And the reason is because the Romans took all those areas over. And the Romans took over England too. So where did the Romans not get to? Ireland and Scotland. So these little corners of early Celtic civilization, language, tribal civilization, survived untouched by the Romans, right? And then the Dark Ages happen, things get really bad. Now it's like 5th century, 6th century AD, and it's the Dark Ages, and it's the era of King Arthur and the Anglo-Saxon invasions. And Ireland and Scotland are still rolling along with this early mix of Romano-British, original Celtic, Pictish and Scotland, obviously, the Kingdom of Dalriada, and then clans of Ireland. And there's many kings in Ireland. There's 20, 30, 40 kingdoms, depending on how you count them. Not like a kingdom as in a nation, as what was a kingdom in the 7th or 8th century AD after the fall of the Roman Empire, the Western Empire. So when were the first coins issued in Scotland and Ireland? Because this is what people are thinking of when they ask me these questions. Well, they do exist. Coins were issued in the early Middle Ages and all through the Middle Ages, and they're collectible. These are small kingdoms. They're kind of rare, so it's an expensive hobby. If you want affordable Celtic coins, as you were saying, you would have to collect modern Irish from the 20th century, right? So the very first coins issued in Ireland were issued by Viking settlements on the coast, which is the founding of the city of Dublin. And here is a tiny silver penny from the 12th century, 11th, 12th century, over 1,000 years old. Silver was money and money was silver. It wasn't a fully monetized economy, but they began to trade with the Vikings in Dublin. And it wasn't all good. The Vikings raided inland and took Irish slaves down to Spain, where they sold them to the Islamic people. So if you're interested in the history of coinage in Ireland, the very first coin, if you're thinking Celtic heritage, this is a Viking coin, so maybe not the happiest thing.
That's what I was getting.
It's kind of crudely made. I don't know if your close-up guy can get in here and get a little light on it. It's got a small head on it, kind of cartoonish. These are in the book on Irish coins. There's like 20 or 30 varieties. Okay, so you'll see on the reverse I'm showing now, there's a cross, right? So this served two purposes. It's a voided cross, which means it has a line through the center. So now you could use a knife or a chisel and you could divide the coin. And this is a penny, so a half of this would be a half penny, and a quarter would be a fourth of a penny, or a farthing, a farth of a penny, right?
That's where that word.
Money is silver and silver is money. The bronze and copper doesn't happen until much, much later. And then the English invade Ireland. You get the theme here, right? Edward Longshanks was quite a famous English king who didn't do the first invasion of Ireland, but extended the British holdings, the English holdings in Ireland. You'll remember him from Longshanks, right? From Braveheart, right? He was a powerful and dread king. And, in the ancient and medieval times, you would think of like, Ivan the Terrible, something like, he's a terrible king. But in medieval times, that was good. You wanted your king to be feared and dreadful, because if he wasn't, your farm would get burnt by the next guy over, right? So having a powerful king was really good for the Kingdom of England, even though he would, by some measure, be considered a tyrannical military leader, right? So this coin was issued in Ireland. So it's a triangle penny with a facing bust of Edward Longshanks. So this is only minted in Ireland, the triangle penny. This is from the 13th century. It's about 700 years old. These are not terribly rare. These are affordable. You can collect these. But again, this is Irish history, and people are going, well, are there any Celtic coins from Ireland? No. This is the history of Ireland. First the Vikings, then the English, right? And the reverse, again, the long cross. This is now a fully Christian era, and it says on it, in Latin, Civitas Dublin, so the city of Dublin. Yeah, very cool coin. Yeah, the money was worth its weight in silver, right? It's a commodity money. The silver penny started in the Dark Ages and lasts all the way into the 19th century, right? It's so the last coin I'm going to show is our fans of Celtic history out there will often like to look at Scottish coins, and of course, the Scottish is an independent kingdom. It's Catholic as opposed to Protestant a little bit later. It has its own kings and queens. It unifies. There's a whole story about the Picts and the royal house and Christianization. But there's no coins from that early era, right? The first coins in Ireland, again, are High Middle Ages. And this is not the very first coin of Ireland, but it's a coin of a very famous king named Robert Bruce. And most people who are interested in Scottish history are like, oh, it's Robert Bruce, right? He also appears in Braveheart, if you'll recall. Silver penny, it's an extremely rare coin. You could get other Scottish kings from this era for 1/10 of the price. Robert Bruce's coins are very rare, and he's the most famous Scottish king of the era, right? There's about 10 or 15 kings you can collect from the 13th, 14th, 15th century. But once you get down to the 16th century, Elizabeth Tudor dies, Elizabeth I. She has no heir, right? She never married. She's the Virgin Queen. So to get a new king of England, they have to go up through Mary Queen of Scots and back down. So James V, the last independent king of Scotland, becomes James of England, and he becomes the English king. We know him through the King James Bible, right? And at this point, the two kingdoms are unified, and Scotland and England are the same kingdom. So from the 16th century, from like 1605 or whatever, on, all the coins of Scotland are English. So people that collect Scottish like this earlier era because this has the native kings and queens of Scotland. Again, it's a silver penny, long cross reverse. It says on the reverse, Rex Scotorum, King of the Scots, which is pretty cool. And it's got his little facing bust on there and his name. You know, in the early Middle Ages, society was organized completely differently than today. If you think about it, it was a hierarchical system, and the people at the bottom were like the serfs and the free peasants and the workers, and they were owned by the landowning gentry and the nobles, who were owned by the counts and the dukes, who were owned by the king, who reported only to God. And that's a hard hierarchy, right? When I say belong, like, you belong to somebody. Everyone fits in their hierarchy under God, right? And the people at the bottom, they had rights, they had property, but not like us. You hold land because the Lord holds the land, and he's giving you the land, and you have to pay him taxes, feudal dues. Well, does the Lord own the land? Well, yes, in the feudal sense, but some duke granted him that land for rents and men-at-arms. Is that duke who owns vast tracts of land? Does he really own the land? No, the king does, right? So in some sense, everything in the kingdom belongs to the king, and the people at the bottom have very limited rights. So in the early Middle Ages, there's really no need for money. People don't own property, and there's no merchants, and there's very little trade. And the early medieval people, they grew their own food, they made their own clothes, they paid their taxes to their lord, and they didn't go anywhere. And they didn't have rights guaranteed under a system of law. There was no police force, no court system. It was all through that hierarchy, right? And if someone stole from you, to get justice, you went to your lord and said, that guy ripped me off. He's going to call that guy's lord. Said, you owe me money because your guy stole from my guy. So there's a form of justice, but it's all through the manor courts, through these nobles and landowning military gentry. In the 11th and 12th century, this all starts to change. And I could do a whole thing on the commercial revolution. Cities start to grow, trade comes back, peasants start getting freedom, a new class of people emerges. Because in the early Middle Ages, you've got the nobles, the clergy, and the peasants. And those are the classes of society. Well, the new merchant class, they don't belong to anybody. They are free, and they move to cities. And as trade increases, as agriculture improves, as rents convert to money rents instead of in kind, you start getting more coins. And the whole society starts to change. And the commercial revolution, to kind of cut it short, money pervades the whole economy, markets and towns and trade, and that leads eventually to the Renaissance in Northern Europe. So it's the story of the fall of Rome, the Dark Ages, the early Middle Ages, the commercial revolution, and then the Renaissance. And there's a whole story of how money intertwines with the changes in society. And these little silver deniers, these are high Middle Ages, again, from the late Viking era in the 10th, 11th century down through the 14th century, Robert the Bruce, and the medieval coins of Scotland and Ireland.
Can I hold one of these?
Sure.
Okay, I was like, it's so old.
They're very thin.
Oh my gosh, that is, I don't think you can even capture that on camera how
They're very thin.
It almost feels like...
They only weigh about a gram or so. And people ask me all the time, like, well, they're so thin, they're so tiny, how are they worth anything? So the analogy I give people is, think about what size a U.S. penny would be if it had to be a penny's worth of silver. It would be like a grain of sand. This is actually a fairly valuable coin, right? The average person would not have access to this much money. A wealthy noble would, but like down on the farm, like you can't even begin to understand. Like cloth. Well, cloth is super expensive. Like this little coin wouldn't even buy, a piece of silk this big, right? But the people that lived on the farm, they couldn't afford linen or woven wools and dyed cloth and silks, right? They lived in homespun.
So, and then people, if they come to this show, they can speak to you and talk to you in person and maybe get a coin or something.
I make new collectors all the time. This is a very different hobby than collecting, silver dollars on a spreadsheet, and which requires a certain specialized knowledge. But I think collecting ancient medieval coins has a richer depth as a hobby because you can read original texts from this period, you can read modern history books, and like I'm always sending people away from my booth at the fair. I'm like, oh, you have to read Suetonius, the 12 Caesars, and this is Julius Augustus Tiberius Claudius Nero, da 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 da. And we'll talk about the history. They'll come back the next year and they're like, oh, that was so cool. Money is a social system, right, that involves trust, administration, property, and a lot of factors. When those things start to break down, money starts to go bad. And here in America, we've had 3 going on 4 generations of stable money. Now, people think there have been inflation. There's been a little bit of inflation, but nothing like what happens when money goes bad. When money goes bad, whether it be coin money, they take the silver out, or fiat money, it becomes worthless, hyperinflation, right? People are, you're rich one day and you're poor the next. It happens overnight, right? Because once people get a sense that money's going bad, it happens like that. And, our own government, like the Roman Empire, they take fiscal measures to increase confidence in the money. And if things start to go bad, they have to fix the problem. But they also constantly need more money to fight wars or pay for roads or pay the army or whatever it is, right? Printing money is a catchphrase in modern politics. And usually what people will say when they say, they don't mean the treasury bills we print. They mean, oh, well, our government prints money and spends it, right? And that causes inflation, which is 100% true. It's happened over and over again. But that's not what our government does. What our government does is they increase the money supply by selling bonds, right? So they're not just printing money and spending it. People buy those bonds. Money comes in, right? And in the case of America, a lot of those bonds are bought by foreigners. So not all of them. It's still like 60% domestic, right? So they're not printing money. They're loaning money to the government against the stream of taxes that are going to pay the interest and eventually the principal on the bonds, right? So as long as that system is run competently and in a trustworthy way, there's no reason to think that our money supply will collapse. Now, if we continue to deficit spend to the point where we can't make the payments, which is what sort of almost happened in Greece, but they rescued them, then the dollar could take a big nosedive and the whole system could get in trouble. So that's why quantitative easing, why rescue the banks? They're trying to prevent the whole system from collapsing. And it's important that they do that. That's what responsible financial administration means. So America does not print money. We do quantitative easing, we do bonds. You could make some analogies, but it's not the same as Weimar Germany, literally printing billion-dollar notes and spending them, paying people with them. That causes hyperinflation, there's no doubt about it.
Well, thank you very much, Greg. And we'll put a plug for you on the channel, and I'll reach out to you, yeah.